Sunlight filters through the gaps in the lush green leaves. A single tender leaf drifts down gracefully. Thunderous applause erupts by the fountain. Guests in elegant attire mingle and converse. Verona stands amidst a sea of blooming flowers. Her hands are clasped beneath her chin, as she wears a gentle smile. My name is Verona. Verona Rosentine. I am living inside a fantasy novel. It is a story of a sexes fighting against dark magic. A truly cliché and mediocre tale. Naturally, I am not the female lead. Davian is draped in a pure white wedding gown, clutching a bouquet of white blossoms in her arms. A happy blush warms her cheeks, and she beams under the watchful eyes of the crowd. I am merely her best friend, a common side character. Verona gently pats Davian's back, looking at her dearest friend with a tender gaze. The two whisper to each other amidst the opulence. Armed with the knowledge of how the story unfolds, I fought side by side with the male lead to defeat the wicked villain. Louis pulls Davian into a warm embrace from behind, pressing a kiss to her hair. I personally guided this novel toward a happy ending. The journey was far from easy. Verona clasps her hands over her heart, silently observing the blissful scene before her. A faint, satisfied smile plays on her lips. Yet, it was a fulfilling life nonetheless. I grew old in that world, and my life eventually reached its peaceful conclusion. That was how it was supposed to be. Verona stares at her reflection in the mirror, her fingertips trembling as she touches her cheek. What on earth is happening? I know for certain that I died. She cups her face in her hands, her eyes wide with utter shock. The girl in the mirror is in the bloom of youth. I have no idea why I've regressed. I am being forced to live this life all over again. A rift tears through the darkness, like the sound of destiny shattering. This can't be happening. Verona gazes into the glass, her breathing turning shallow and ragged. After dying, if somehow returned to the starting point. I strictly followed the novel's original ending. So why am I back at the beginning again? Verona stares intensely at her reflection. Could there be another ending I missed? And so my third life began. Dressed in a dark gown, she walks coldly past Davian, who is kneeling on the ground. I went out of my way to torment the female lead. In the end, I met a miserable death as a traitor. My fourth life. Verona is draped in a dark red cloak, her body bound tightly with thick ropes. She stands before the towering guillotine. This was the price for joining a dark magic organization. An end brought about by public execution. Fate shatters like a mirror once more. Cracks spread frantically through the void. My fifth life. Verona's hand drops weakly to her side, her fingertips brushing against the cold edge of the bed. Reduced to a mere shell of a person, I died in absolute solitude, having achieved nothing. My sixth life. She changes into sharp hunting attire, gripping a long sword firmly with both hands. She swings wildly in the wilderness, trying to sever the chains of the cycle through sheer force. My 10th life. Verona curls up against a dark stone wall, her ankles bound by heavy iron chains. Spending my days rotting in a cold prison cell. My 17th life. She snapped her eyes open. Her gaze was as cold as a blade, brimming with endless exhaustion and rage.
And now?
Verona stood silently before the shattered mirror, letting the cracks trace across her face. This was my 21st life. Verona slumped onto the cold floor. Please, just let me rest now. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingertips brushing against the dangling coarse rope. She stared upward with hollow eyes. A clear knock sounded from outside the door. The heavy double doors were slowly pushed open, a beam of light piercing the gloom of the room. My lady, it is time for dinner. A pair of bare feet hung in midair, swaying limply. The maid froze in her tracks, a broken cry escaping her throat. Ah, the maid stood at the door, her gaze shifting up. Her pupils contracted violently from sheer terror. Her lips trembled, unable to form a coherent sound. My lady, the mirror shattered completely. Countless crystal shards sprayed through the air, each one reflecting Verona's despairing face. No matter what choices I make, no matter what ending I face, It all eventually returns to the starting point. It seems that answer wasn't correct either. Verona lightly stroked her neck, feeling the physical sensation of her skin. There were no rope burns left behind. She stood quietly before the dressing mirror, watching the girl in the reflection whose complexion looked perfectly normal. This is my 22nd life. There is nothing left that can surprise me. My lady, what are you doing in front of the mirror? Verona sat slumped on the floor. I just wanted to have a word with God. The maid shook out a white cloth, a gentle smile on her face. Then why don't you go to the temple to pray? The temple, Verona whipped her head around, a flicker of realization in her eyes. Come to think of it, this day Iv returned to. Isn't it the very day Dominic massacres all the priests? Dominic stood amidst the raging flames, his long sword pointed diagonally at the ground. His cloak billowed in the heat of the fire. All around him was nothing but ruins and debris. Blood stained the sacred steps red. Dominic Lochlearn, the villain destined to destroy everything in the novel. He was subjected to horrific abuse in the temple orphanage, eventually awakening dark powers, but his soul was utterly consumed in the process. In every life I've experienced, Dominic was always the demon who ended everything. Verona tilted her head, her gaze lingering on the empty air. Speaking of which, why does he always have to play the role of the villain? If I can stop his descent into darkness, would the ending be any different? This is a method I've never tried before. Verona braced her hands against the floor, her fingertips trembling slightly from the exertion. But can I really change this damned cycle? She sat alone in the dim room, her silhouette appearing thin yet determined. Facing an inescapable destiny, she fell into a long period of contemplation. No, I must try. I have nothing left to lose anyway. Verona stood up abruptly from the mirror, her long hair swaying violently with the movement. Rose, please prepare a carriage for the temple immediately. The afterglow of the setting sun spilled between the magnificent stone pillars. The temple corridor was dyed a mournful, vivid orangerd. Verona, draped in a dark cloak, walked alone up the empty steps. Her footsteps echoed through the silent hallway. She reached out, her fingertips pressing against the heavy wooden door. With a piercing creak, she slowly pushed open the entrance to the unknown. Verona passed through the towering pillars, the red carpet extending beneath her feet. At the end lay the sacred altar. She walked alone toward the depths of the hall, every step exceptionally firm. Verona came to a halt, eyeing the necklace and dagger laid out on the table. It seems my timing was perfect. She tilted her head slightly, glancing behind her out of the corner of her eye. Heavy footsteps echoed through the cavernous hall. That familiar black hair, once you have seen it, you could never forget it. Dominic, clad in a black robe, was approaching step by step. A cold, murderous intent flickered in those red eyes. Who are you? Verona pulled back her hood, letting her red hair fall loose in the play of light and shadow. Although this is our first formal meeting, I am quite curious. She turned around, looking the young man straight in the eye. I am the person who can tell you the information you don't yet know. Do you think I'd believe such nonsense? Dominic's brow furrowed, his gaze full of wariness and suspicion. Verona remained composed, the corner of her mouth curling into a predictable arc. This was exactly the reaction she expected. But I know his secret, a secret only I am privy. If I use that ring, it should at least pique his interest. She began to walk, stepping across the red carpet toward the boy. Dominic. Verona stopped in front of him, tilting her head up slightly, to look directly into those red eyes. I know your secret. You not only know my name, but my secret as well. Dominic's gaze turned instantly cold. He lunged forward, his fingers clamping around the back of Verona's neck like an iron vice, roughly dragging her toward him. Verona's pupils shrank, her breath hitching from the sudden impact. Forced to lean back, her vision collided with those eyes burning with rage. What exactly is this secret you speak of? Dominic leaned down, the tip of his nose almost touching her cheek. His lips curled into a cruel, dangerous smirk. Explain yourself now. Dominic leaned closer to her face, whispering his demand to know what the secret was. With a trace of a smile, he watched Verona from inches away. Tell me now. Verona lifted her head slightly, her expression appearing somewhat surprised. You certainly are impatient, aren't you? Dominic, you possess royal blood. Dominic's smile vanished. Stop joking. That's preposterous. Verona shoved his shoulder away, putting distance between them. It shouldn't matter. If I twist the facts just a little, right? I have seen the future. Dominic braced one hand against the wall, trapping Verona in front of him. So, do you intend to make a prophecy? Dominic's brow creased slightly. My mother was just a commoner. Everything you're saying. Verona looked him straight in the eye. You have a sapphire ring, don't you? Verona interrupted. How do you know about that? Dominic stared intensely at her. Do you believe me a little more now? Verona's expression turned serious. That keepsake from your mother is actually an item only a princess is permitted to own. Your mother married the Duke of Lochleven. She was Princess Olivia. Dominic lowered his eyes, watching the light and shadow on the floor. The Emperor once said he would never abandon his own blood. Then why did he abandon me? Dominic clenched his fists. Why did he have to ruin my life like this? A violent aura began to surge around him. Black mist spread outward like grasping tentacles. Verona was thrown back by the force, her body slamming hard against a stone pillar. She raised her hand to shield her eyes from the blinding light, crying out each other's names. No, the Emperor didn't even know you existed. The person who framed you deceived the Emperor. The Duke of Lochleven. The territory was reduced to ruins overnight. Dominic barely escaped that catastrophe with his life. Dominic suddenly went rigid. That was the curse he wanted to escape most. He looked down at the ring around his neck. His fingertips gently brushed against it. The cold texture of the metal. At this rate, I'll either starve or freeze to death. But his mother had warned him. He must never lose it. So he couldn't even sell it for money. May God bless you. A gentle call came from the distance. Dominic turned his head, watching the crowd distributing food. The clergy were handing out bread to the children. This was food provided by the orphanage. God loves everyone equally. Please take some. To survive, Dominic entered the temple orphanage. However, his suffering did not end there. The sound of a whip lashing flesh echoed through the room. He was bound by heavy iron chains. His hands were suspended before a cold stone wall. His body was covered in bruises.
He gritted his teeth and endured the torture.
The priest raised the long whip, looking down at the battered boy. You stubborn brat. The priest panted heavily, gazing at the boy lying in a pool of blood. I wanted to make it look like an accident. It seems that failed. Before that person finds out, I have to finish this once and for all.
He drew a dagger from his waist.
The sound of metal scraping was piercing in the silence. Just die already. Dominic weakly opened his eyes. His vision gradually blurred. He had reached his limit. He couldn't hold on any longer. Light suddenly exploded deep within his pupils. Blood boiled in his eyes. A cold, dark power awakened from within. The dagger in the priest's hand shattered instantly, turning into countless shards flying through the air. He backed away in terror, letting out a cry of confusion. Dominic had awakened his dark magic. He stepped through the pools of blood. From then on, the empire was plunged into a sea of blood. Verona raised her hand to her forehead. I won't let tragedy repeat itself this time. I'll guide his anger toward the right people. Dominic, your enemy isn't the emperor, nor is it those priests. The person who truly ruined your life is the current empress, and the forces backing her. In this empire, you and the crown prince are the only two people with royal blood. The empress is worried about her weak son. She is afraid of you, afraid that you, her nephew, will take the throne. Dominic suppressed his mana. Just for that pathetic reason. My life has been. The reason and the target are clear to me now. This is convenient. I'll kill them all immediately. Verona quickly grabbed him. You can't do that. your life will be in danger. First, you need to meet the emperor and reclaim your title as duke. Dominic looked at her sideways. I will never forget, even if I die in pursuit of revenge. It has nothing to do with you. Verona replied. I'm not telling you to forgive them. I'm telling you to take back everything that belongs to you. Dominic was puzzled. Take back everything? Verona nodded. Yes, everything you lost because of the Empress. Everything important and precious. Dominic scrutinized her. Why is this woman telling me all this? Dominic approached Verona step by step, pinning her against the wall. Who the hell are you? Verona argued. I am the daughter of Count Rosentine. Verona Rosentine. Dominic sneered. You're saying a count's daughter has the power of foresight? Furthermore, you're trying to use that power to save me. That makes no sense at all. Verona looked him straight in the eye. It's because I think if you survive, it will be the best outcome for me as well. I just want everyone to be happy in some way. You can believe me, or you can choose not to. But I want to save you. Dominic looked at her blankly. What on earth are you talking about? A voice came from outside the door. Your Majesty, please come this way. Dominic looked toward the door in shock. Verona grabbed his hand. Follow me, she whispered. The heavy doors slowly creaked open. We have arrived. Your Majesty, the Pope looked around with a confused expression. The room was empty. The official said in confusion. That's strange. I was certain I felt someone's presence here. The Pope said, it was probably just your imagination. There aren't any good hiding spots here anyway. Just as Dominic was about to speak, Verona quickly covered his mouth. Verona reached out and covered Dominic's mouth. Her fingertips pressed against his lips. Their heartbeats throbbed in the silence. Verona listened intently, checking the surroundings. It seems they've gone. Anyway, don't forget what I said. Verona turned to leave. Her boots clicked against the floor, making a soft sound. Hey, wait. Verona casually tossed an object.
Take this.
Dominic lifted the thin chain. The pendant dangled from his fingertips. This necklace will show the degree of your cell corruption, to what extent it has reached. Try to kill as few people as possible. When you use dark magic, use it to check your condition. Verona pulled up her cloak's hood, hiding her conspicuous red hair. She turned her head and whispered, See you later. Dominic looked solemn. His fingers tightly gripped the necklace at his chest. Verona Rosentine. The name drifted through his thoughts. The Rosentine Count's estate stood tall in the night. Verona sat in an armchair on the terrace. A thick ancient tome lay open in her hands. There's still no news from the temple. I wonder if he believed me. She stopped flipping through the book. Her gaze fell on the empty air, lost in thought. Suddenly, a faint noise reached her ears. Verona snapped her head up. A hint of alertness appeared in her eyes. She stood up, walking to the edge of the terrace, both hands gripping the carved railing. She leaned over to look down. I thought I heard something just now. Verona was startled. Her body trembled involuntarily. Dominic? Dominic was sitting on a thick tree branch. One leg was propped up. His arm rested casually on his knee. Looking down at the figure on the terrace, Verona held the railing with both hands, looking up at the young man in the tree. Hey, what are you doing up there? Dominic shifted his position. His tone was, I couldn't exactly waltz through the front door. Verona lowered her gaze. A helpless, bitter smile played on her lips. I suppose so. That makes sense. She looked up again. Her eyes were full of doubt. By the way, what on earth are you here for? The tree branch was empty. Only the swaying leaves remained. He had vanished. Verona looked around. Outside the terrace, the night was deathly silent. He stood alone on the balcony. The evening breeze ruffled his long hair. He stared at the spot where that figure had once appeared. Verona turned around abruptly. Suddenly, the lights went out. Her foot slipped. Losing her balance, she fell backward. A dark cloak swept through the air, the fabric rustling softly. Be careful, Dominic reached out and grabbed her waist. He caught her firmly in his arms. Verona leaned back against his arm, looking up at him. Why are you here? Dominic let out a low grunt.
His heavy body leaned forward, pressing against her.
Verona sensed something was wrong. Her eyes fell on his abdomen. Wait, are you hurt? On the side of his dark uniform, near the waist, a dark blood stain was spreading. The two of them sat on the edge of the bed in the bedroom. Verona gazed at the young man before her. How did this happen? Dominic stood in the center of the room. I ran into a returning paladin when I was leaving the temple. The power is difficult to control. He turned his face away, avoiding her gaze. Didn't you warn me not to kill anyone? Verona continued to watch him. Dominic suddenly gripped his collar tightly. But this is different.
His breathing grew ragged.
His fingertips trembled from the strain. Verona reached out both hands. Her fingertips touched his shirt. She began to undo the buttons, one by one. Dominic's body froze. His gaze fell on her focused profile. She moved closer to his chest, continuing to undo the remaining buttons. A flush crept onto Dominic's cheeks. He didn't know where to look. The shirt slid off his shoulders, bunching up at his waist. It revealed the boy's heavily scarred back. Verona stared at the wound. This injury is too severe. Can we really just leave it like this? As long as the bleeding stops, it should heal quickly. Dominic sat down, bare-chested. The bandages wrapped around his waist were soaked with bright red blood. Verona walked behind him. Her gaze was fixed on the boy's back. These were the marks left by the priest's abuse. She never imagined it would be this bad. Verona reached out, her fingertips hovering over those crisscrossing scars. It must have been so painful. Dominic turned his head slightly. Can't you at least act a little embarrassed? Verona countered. You're the one sitting here half-naked, not me. Dominic let out a light chuckle. You really never back down, do you? Dominic lowered his eyes. His expression softened in the shadows. Verona looked at the boy's back. Despite such a serious injury, he managed to hold on until he got here. Dominic propped himself up on the bed with one hand. The muscles in his arm tensed from the effort. Don't get the wrong idea. I didn't come here for your sake. He suddenly leaned in close, pinning Verona into the corner of the bed. Their breath mingled in the narrow space between them. I came here for something else. Verona tilted her head slightly, a look of confusion in her eyes. For what, then? The corners of Dominic's mouth curled into a smirk. His gaze was deep and intense. I have a favor to ask of you. Verona froze. A favor? Dominic looked her straight in the eye. It's nothing difficult. Let me stay. Verona looked dazed. Stay, what? She stood up abruptly, her finger trembling as she pointed at him. You stay here. Why? Dominic asked with a calm expression. You might not know this yet, but I have nowhere else to go now. He reached out and accurately caught Verona's wrist. Don't kill anyone. Don't use dark magic. I've done everything you told me to. So surely this one request shouldn't be a problem. The corners of Dominic's mouth turned up slightly, forming a meaningful smile. Don't you want to help me? For the sake of that so-called best future? Dominic raised his hand, his fingertips lightly brushing his ear. His gaze was locked onto her face. If that's the case, then take responsibility for me. Verona held her breath. Her gaze was frozen on the boy's face. Dominic. Luclaren. The name echoed in her mind. What exactly are you planning? This uncontrollable situation caused a wave of inexplicable panic to rise within her. Dominic, still bare-chested, held onto Verona's wrist. He guided her hand toward his own cheek. The movement was gentle, yet carried a force that brooked no refusal. Verona stood frozen in place, staring into those deep eyes, trying to read the truth behind that smile. Dominic's lips curved into an arch. You want to save me, right? For that so-called best future?
He leaned back against the headboard, shirtless.
His slender fingers tugged at Verona's sleeve. Since that's the case, you should take responsibility. Verona's eyes widened. Her breath hitched in shock. What are you talking about? She instinctively tried to pull her arm back, but her body remained frozen. Dominic leaned in closer, his gaze wandering over her. What, did you think I was going to eat you? Verona lowered her eyes, avoiding that burning gaze. That's not what I meant. She took a deep breath, forcing her racing heart to calm down. I must stay calm. This might actually be an opportunity. If I can keep him by my side, it will be much easier to monitor his every move. Verona looked up, her eyes becoming clear and determined again. Verona lightly rubbed her chin. In that case, it's fine if you stay here for a while. She stood up abruptly. Since I said I would help you, naturally I will take responsibility. Please, make yourself at home. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, watching her resolute figure as she turned to leave. Where are you going? Verona headed for the door without looking back. I'm going to finish reading the book you interrupted. Dominic let out a light laugh. You're the first person who would. Leave me all alone just to go read a book. Verona stopped in her tracks. There's a first time for everything. She walked to the bookshelf and picked up a heavy volume. Her fingertips brushed against the cold cover. Dominic watched her silhouette. Instead of reading a boring book like that, why not stay and talk to me? What do you say? Verona opened the book. Her fingers paused slightly on the page. Dominic approached from behind, his chest nearly pressing against Verona's back. Like, telling me more about yourself. Verona replied, I'm just the daughter of a count. I don't have the prominent background you're expecting.
He casually snatched the book from Verona's hands.
Holding it up to flip through it, he let out a soft tisk. How truly boring. Verona watched him silently. Her gaze lingered on the taut lines of his muscles. He really is like a cat, unpredictable and full of aggression. The hands of the clock moved, making a monotonous clicking sound. Dominic flipped through the pages with boredom. Just how much longer are you going to look at that book? He turned his head. Finding that Verona had already fallen into a deep sleep, she lay curled on the sofa, her breathing steady and even. Dominic let out a helpless sigh. Honestly, falling asleep just like that. He slowly rose to his feet, walked over to the sofa, and leaned down. He slipped his arms behind her neck and under her knees. Dominic swept Verona up in a bridal carry, his movements gentle and silent. She leaned against his chest, her hair cascading over his arms. He stepped steadily toward the bed, his leather boots sinking into the thick carpet, making no sound at all. Dominic carefully laid Verona onto the bed, his touch incredibly cautious. Once my body recovers, I must immediately find a temporary residence and sources of information. I also need to investigate the secrets within the imperial family. He looked down at the sleeping girl, his gaze deepening. And then there's the matter of you. Stars twinkle in the night sky, and dreams descend. Verona, a call echoes from afar. Verona stands in a courtyard in full bloom, looking somewhat dazed. That was a long time ago. In the dream, someone is calling her name. Davian walks up quickly, a bright smile on her face. What are you doing here? The man beside her follows closely. Davian has been waiting for you. Verona looks at the two before her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt your precious time together. If that's the case, you shouldn't have come here in the first place. The man folds his arms, his tone cold. Aiden, didn't I tell you not to say things like that? Davian quickly interjects, looking a bit embarrassed. Verona watches them silently. Davian,
You've made a terrible choice.
a choice that might end up hurting you both. You might even hate me for it. Davian speaks calmly. If it means you can still find happiness, then I am willing to endure it all. Davian grips Verona's hand tightly. That choice was for your sake, to make you happy, wasn't it? If you can still be happy, then I'm willing to understand everything. No matter what choice you make, we are friends forever. That fact will never change. Verona looks at her dear friend, a bitter smile touching the corners of her mouth. Davian, you really are. Hey. A low male voice suddenly rips through the dream. Dominic leans in close.
His hands bracing the bed on either side of Verona's body.
Whose name were you just calling out? Verona's eyes snap open. Dominic's face is inches away from hers. Her breath hitches in shock. Crisp birdsong chirps from outside, beating against the stagnant air. Verona rubs her sleepy eyes. I remember I was reading just a moment ago. Dominic sits on the edge of the bed, watching her dazed state. You fell asleep like that, so I carried you to bed. Also, who is this Davian? You kept murmuring that name in your sleep. Verona's body instantly freezes. Oh, right. I forgot, Davi. An is the center of this world, the focal point of everyone's attention. The reason Dominic fully descends into villainy is because through his entanglements with the protagonists, he develops an obsession with the female lead, Devian, that borders on madness. I absolutely cannot mention Devian in front of him. Not a single word. Verona shifts her gaze away. Just a friend. There's no need for you to know. Dominic presses closer. If you're crying for them even in your dreams, doesn't that mean they're more than just a friend? Verona snaps back in embarrassment. You're being far too persistent. Besides, why were you staring at someone's sleeping face? Without their permission? A heavy knock suddenly sounds at the door. Knock, knock. My lady? Are you awake? Verona and Dominic freeze at the same time, looks of shock on their faces. Her heart pounds violently. The maid stands outside the door, tilting her head in confusion. My lady, it's already time to get up. Why is there no answer? Has something happened to her health? The maid's expression turns frantic. If there's still no response, I'm coming in. Verona lurches forward, grabbing Dominic's wrist with a death grip. Her fingertips tighten with the force of her grasp. Verona, Dominic whispers. She pulls him toward her with a sudden surge of strength. Don't open the door. Dominic grips her wrist tightly back, his voice urgent and low. Their bodies are pressed close together, their breaths intertwining. Verona stares into his crimson eyes mere inches away. Her heartbeat is deafening in the silence. Dominic suddenly exerts force, pulling Verona toward him. Verona, don't open that door. He grips her wrist firmly, his breathing heavy and low. A resolute determination glints in his eyes. Verona looks at their entwined hands, feeling the warmth of his palm. Dominic, don't worry, she looks up, and a reassuring smile appears on her lips. I won't betray you. Dominic gazes into her eyes, their hands still locked together, as if they were his only salvation. The maid looks panicked. Did something really happen to the young lady? She flings the door open. My lady, are you all right? Verona is leaning against the headboard, her face showing signs of fatigue. I'm not feeling very well today. The maid hurries to the bedside, her hands clasped over her chest. Oh, whatever shall we do? Should I prepare some medicine for you? Verona shakes her head gently. It's fine, I just need a little rest, and I'll be better. The maid glances toward the window. Sunlight spills into the quiet room. She turns around, silently retreating toward the door. My lady, it looks like there's something on the terrace. The maid looks toward the window with a hesitant expression. Verona suddenly grabs the maid's shoulders. Don't mind that. I just opened the window a crack for some fresh air. My lady, the maid is pushed toward the door, her footsteps a bit stumbled. One want to get some proper rest this morning, so please come back later. Verona ushers the maid out of the room, her tone firm and brooks no argument. The maid stands outside the door, still looking a bit perplexed. The door is slammed shut, followed by the sharp click of the lock. The maid stands alone in the hallway, tilting her head as she stares at the closed door. Her footsteps eventually fade away. Verona leans her back against the door, letting out a long sigh of relief. She's finally gone. Dominic folds his arms. What on earth were you so worried about? Verona asks, Did you think I'd just scream? Because there's a strange man in here? I don't fully trust you yet. He takes a step forward, moving toward the center of the room. If you make any suspicious moves, I'm prepared to kill both you and that maid at any moment. Verona asks, Using dark magic? Dominic nods. Exactly, Verona retorts. Doesn't using dark magic have any effect on you at all? Dominic stops in his tracks. None whatsoever? In fact, the more I use my power, the more power I have.
He extended his right hand.
A faint, dark aura swirling around his fingertips. More important, you seem to have been unusually focused on dark magic lately. Dominic turned around, staring deep into Verona's eyes. Is it because someone close to you died from dark magic? Dominic was covered in blood, head hanging low, his breath shallow. Verona looked at the tragic scene before her, her eyes filled with a cold calm. Think whatever you want. Verona turned her face away. If you can't trust me, then just kill me. I don't care. Dominic walked toward her. Why do you hold your own life in such low regard? Or do you truly wish for death? Verona let out a light laugh and tilted her head slightly. At least not right now. Because in this life, it seems many things will change. Verona pushed him away. But remember this. I will never betray your trust. If you doubt me, no matter how many times it takes, I will prove it to you. I will take responsibility for choosing to help you. The corners of Dominic's mouth curved upward, a fleeting smile flickering across his face. In that case, he reached out and firmly grasped her hand. It's a deal, Dominic smirked. I acknowledge you as my official ally. Verona turned away. To commemorate our partnership, I'll give you a piece of information. Soon, a certain highly talented holy knight will become your shackle. Just one holy knight, Dominic asked indifferently. Verona replied, he won't be as easy to deal with as you think. Though Hei's only an apprentice right now, he possesses incredible potential. He will be a troublesome opponent for you. So it's best to avoid him. Dominic's expression became serious. I'll keep that in mind. Verona responded softly. Dominic began to walk, heading toward the window. Where are you going? Verona followed closely behind, her eyes tracking his back. Dominic threw on a dark cloak just for a stroll. His body turned into specks of light, vanishing at the edge of the terrace. The town streets were bustling with noise. Residents bustled past the stalls. Dominic lowered his hood, blending into the noisy crowd. I will never betray your trust. Verona's words echoed in his ears. He stood by a window, a meaningful smile playing on his lips. What a strange woman. Dominic stepped forward, disappearing at the end of the street. Verona showed no fear in the face of threats, calmly speaking her mind. Is that what makes her so interesting? Dominic reached out and fastened his black cloak. His fingertips grazed the cold metal buckle. Or is it that I'm drawn to her? But there is one very strange thing. Think whatever you want. If you can't trust me, then kill me. I don't care. Dominic watched Verona's receding back. She had no attachment to her own life. Why on earth was that? He walked alone through the noisy streets, his figure disappearing into the crowd.
Dominic.
I long for death. Dominic suddenly clutched the fabric over his chest. His pupils trembled with shock. That drop of rain seemed to still linger by his ear. Dominic came to a sudden halt. Verona, he looked around the noisy streets. An hallucination. You know nothing. The cold voice exploded in his mind once more. Dominic's expression froze. What is this? Verona, what exactly are you hiding? A few days later, the Grand Manor stood quietly in the sunlight. Verona watched the figure ahead of her and called out softly, Dominic. You go for a walk every day, don't you? Dominic said. Didn't I say I wanted to reclaim my duchy? I'm simply preparing for that. Verona asked, Is that so? Dominic stared ahead. That voice surfaced in his mind again. I want to die, Dominic. Of course, what else would it be? Dominic donned his dark cloak, covering half of his face. It'll be back around dusk. The cloak billowed in the wind, turning into a trail of black smoke that vanished at the edge of the terrace. Verona looked out at the empty courtyard. What does he do outside all day? Verona began to walk, the patterns on her skirt swaying as she moved. Regardless, there's no need for me to care about what Hei's doing. I have more important matters to attend to. Verona pushed open the heavy door and stepped out of the room. A maid was pushing a meal cart through the hallway. She stopped and asked, "My lady, are you going out?" Verona stopped and turned toward her. "Oh, Rose." Rose pushed the cart closer and gave a slight bow. "I'll arrange a carriage for you immediately." Verona replied softly, "Thank you. And can you keep this a secret from my father?" Rose looked puzzled. "A secret from the Count? Where are you going?" Verona glanced around to make sure no one was nearby. She leaned in and whispered in Rose's ear, "Rose, do you know if my father has a sister?" Rose nodded. "Yes, but why?" Verona lowered her voice. "I'm looking for her son, my cousin." Rose's eyes widened. She looked stunned. Verona raised her index finger to her lips. She signaled the maid to keep quiet. "Rose, but my lady, I heard the Count's sister married a commoner, against the family's wishes. And she left the Count's estate long ago, didn't she?" Verona spoke. "I know that, of course. Her husband died young, and now she's suffering from a severe illness. She wants at least her son to return to the Rosentine estate." Rose was confused. "If that's the case, why?" Verona leaned in closer to the maid, lowering her voice further. "Because," Rose let out a startled cry. Verona raised her finger to hush her. Verona turned around. "I'll be back before dark. Until then, please keep this a secret." Hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. The maid stood still, watching Verona walk away. All right, sunlight spilled onto the bustling streets. Verona had changed into a plain blue cloak, weaving through the busy crowd. She lowered her hood, hiding her face. She quickly crossed the stone-paved square and slipped into a dark alleyway. Verona walked forward. He should be wandering around the noble district. I can find his whereabouts at the Information Guild. A holy knight reached out and stopped her. This area is unsafe. Verona instinctively asked, "What are you doing here?" The holy knight was puzzled. "Do you know me?" Verona lowered her gaze. Averting her gaze. No. I have the wrong person. I didn't expect to run into him so soon. I have spoken with Dominic before. This promising holy knight, Louis. He would be the best candidate to stand against Dominic. But now that I've decided to help Dominic, it's difficult to face him. Louis urged her. Regardless, please go.
It's dangerous here.
Verona asked, "Why can't we just go our separate ways?" Louis refused. "No, I will accompany you to the main road." Verona interrupted him. "There's no need for that. If you wish to escort a lady, then go find someone else." Louis looked at Verona in surprise. The red-haired Verona walked right past him. "Then I won't bother you further." Louis caught her sleeve. "Wait, I will see you to your destination." Verona thought to herself, "I'm being intentionally cold to him, yet he still refuses to back down. Of all places, why did it have to happen right here?" Verona suddenly paused. "That's a medicine bag. Did he come to buy medicine?" Speaking of which, Louis's mother, his only noble relative, was gravely ill. But in the end, she passed away, Louis insisted. "I have no other motive. I just want to ensure your safety." Verona looked at the persistent man. "I have one condition. I am going to see a child. I want you to protect that child." Louis agreed. "Leave it to me." Verona looked at this man she had known so well in her past lives. As always, when it comes to helping others, he never considers the consequences. Verona led the way.
It's nearby.
Louis stammered. "All right. This area is dangerous, so please let me lead the way." Verona countered. "Even though you don't even know where I'm going." A leather shoe peeked out from behind a stone pillar. Shadows beneath a dark winter hat watched their every move. Louis followed closely behind the young lady. Footsteps echoed through the empty alleyways. "Might I ask where you are going?" Verona walked forward without looking back. Her voice was cold and calm. "The Information Guild." Louis maintained a steady pace, his boots thudding heavily against the stone tiles. "Is it for the child you are going to see?" Verona nodded slightly. Yes, the people there know the child's whereabouts. The heavy wooden door was pushed open slowly, letting out a sharp, grating creak. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light. A man stood behind the counter, casually arranging wine bottles. A rare guest indeed. This is no place for a lady to visit. Verona threw back her cloak and walked straight to the bar. It doesn't matter who I am, does it? She reached out with her slender fingers and pressed a gold coin onto the table. As long as the payment is made, anything can be investigated here, can't it? The man gave a soft chuckle, his fingertips brushing across the counter. You are absolutely right, my lady. Verona lowered her hood. A certain noble house hired some thugs to keep a red-haired child away. You should know something about this. The man rested his chin on his hand, his gaze sweeping over the coin on the counter. Let me see. My memory has been a bit hazy lately. He suddenly clapped his hands together, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. I remember now. That boy was clamoring to see someone at the time. Verona took a step forward, her tone becoming urgent. Tell me where the child is. The man spread his hands, putting on a troubled look. I'm afraid that might be difficult. After all, the client is a rather prominent figure. Verona closed her eyes and let out a heavy sigh. She took an exquisite hair ornament from her dress, placed it on the counter, and slid it over. How about this? The man leaned down to scrutinize the ornament carefully. Is this the real deal? Verona watched him coldly. You should already know my identity, shouldn't you? The man let out a hearty laugh and leaned his hands on the counter. Fine, I'll give you a rough map. He pulled a piece of parchment from under the counter, his finger sliding across the rough surface. Hayes, currently staying at a cheap inn. But I suggest you head there quickly, lest he be kicked out of there as well. Verona reached out and took the neatly folded map. I hope this information is accurate. The man narrowed his eyes slightly, a confident smile on his face. I never provide false information. He reached out and caught her hand, his fingertips brushing her fair skin, in a flirtatious gesture. Louis's gaze turned icy in an instant.
He drew the longsword from his waist with a snap,
pressing the tip of the blade against the man's throat, with a sharp, clear ring. He stepped in front of Verona, the hand holding his sword steady as a rock. Take your hand off her. Louis pressed the blade closer to the man's throat. If you value your life, apologize properly. The man raised his hands, a frivolous smile still on his face. It seems you have a very loyal guardian. I apologize then. Louis's eyes remained sharp, showing no intention of withdrawing his weapon. Verona reached out and touched his pauldron, her fingertips applying a light pressure. He isn't worth your trouble. Let's go. Louis's tense shoulders relaxed. He sheathed his sword and responded in a low voice. Understood. The two walked out of the building together, their boots clicking on the stone path. Their figures gradually disappeared at the end of the street. Louis turned his head to look at the girl beside him. Are you really all right? Verona pulled her blue cloak tight and continued walking without pause. It was but I'm fine. Louis maintained his steady pace, following close behind. You really should have made him give a formal apology. He stopped and looked toward the buildings at the end of the street. So, was it all to help that poor child? Louis turned around, his expression becoming serious. Is the child you want to protect that boy? Verona stopped, with her back to him. Yes, Louis stared at her back. I'll go with you. Verona looked back, a faint smile on her lips. Then we shall take a carriage. Follow me. Louis's face flushed slightly, and he nodded vigorously. All right, he set off, his boots thudding heavily against the stone ground. With a dull sound, Louis suddenly froze, standing rooted to the spot. He whipped his head around to look at the empty street. Wait, Verona stopped and looked at the night in confusion. What is it? Louis's brow furrowed as he searched through the scattered buildings. His expression grew solemn. No, it must be my imagination. Verona breathed a sigh of relief. She started walking again. Don't scare me like that. Louis followed behind in silence. His boots clicked against the pavement once more. Their figures vanished into the depths of the alley. Dominic stepped onto the stone road. The solace of his boots made a dull thud. He came to a halt. He stepped aside into the shadows of the building. What is the meaning of this? He pulled back his dark hood, revealing a head of black hair. He stared into the distance with a cold gaze. You didn't even notice my presence. Is this that talented paladin you were talking about? Louis walked down the street. A lingering blush remained on his profile. He looked somewhat awkward. Hayes still just an apprentice knight, but Hayes a fellow with incredible potential. Even for you, he would be a troublesome opponent. So try to avoid meeting him as much as possible. He tilted his head slightly. A hint of self-deprecation touched his tone. So it's fine for someone like me, but is it really okay for you to see him? Louis walked by Verona's side. His white uniform stood out vividly in the sunlight. The two were passing through a quiet street. Verona lifted a corner of her winter hat, revealing her vibrant red hair. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. Dominic remained hidden in the darkness. His thin lips parted slightly. Is it because Hayes a paladin of the temple?
He pulled his dark cloak tighter.
A trace of coldness flickered in his eyes. How irritating. Dominic turned his face slightly. Is it because Hayes a paladin of the temple? He furrowed his brows. A trace of coldness flickered in his eyes. I don't like him. The carriage wheels rolled over the stone pavement, creating a dull vibration. It slowly moved through the quiet street. Verona pulled her blue cloak tight. She rested her fingertips against her chin. She fell into a long silence, lost in thought. Louis turned his head. He watched the young woman beside him. Her red hair was like a burning flame. Verona noticed the gaze from her side. She turned her head to look at Louis. What is it? You're staring quite intently. Louis suddenly snapped out of it. He awkwardly averted his eyes. Oh, it's nothing. Where are we going? A gentle smile played on Verona's lips. To the checkpoint. Once we arrive, to make things easier, please handle matters in the name of God. All right, she looked at the upright young man beside her. If it was Louis, she didn't actually need to give him many instructions. Louis's body stiffened slightly. He turned to look at the girl beside him. How do you know my... Verona's expression froze instantly. A flash of panic crossed her eyes. She avoided his gaze. Oh, that... She quickly regained her composure. Her gaze landed on the leather belt at his waist. Isn't it written right there on your belt? Louis looked down. He looked at the white belt fastened around his waist. His name was indeed embroidered on it. Verona turned around. She looked straight ahead again. I don't know who is sick, but I hope they get well soon. Louis lowered his gaze. His expression turned solemn. I'm grateful for that. More importantly, your tone has unconsciously become quite casual. Verona's body went rigid. A bead of cold sweat formed on her temple. If that makes you uncomfortable, I am very sorry. Louis shook his head gently. His voice was kind. I don't mind. Please speak as you like. Verona gave an awkward smile. She really had to watch her habits. The carriage stopped in front of a grand building. Louis was the first to step out.
He reached out his arm to steady her.
His movements were poised and elegant. Verona took his hand. She stepped down from the carriage. She set foot on the stone road. You truly are a paladin of impeccable etiquette. Louis looked ahead. His expression was humble. No, I've only studied noble etiquette in theory. Verona began to walk. Her skirt swayed gently with every movement. From now on, whenever you meet a noble, just do exactly what you did just now. She tilted her head slightly. If anyone tries to embarrass you, you must tell me. Dealing with mediocre nobles who abuse their power happens to be a hobby of mine. Verona pulled up the hood of her blue cloak, concealing her vibrant red hair. A confident curve formed on her lips. Well then, let's go. The street looked somewhat empty in the sunset. 2 rats scurried through a gap by a wooden barrel, making a faint rustling sound. Louis stopped walking. He looked down at the map in his hand. According to the map, it should be right here. But a dull thudding sound echoed from deep within the alleyway. Verona snapped her head around. A look of alertness appeared in her eyes. 3 burly men were cornering someone in a dead end. They were punching and kicking a thin figure huddled in the corner. Heavy blows echoed in the narrow space. Louis furrowed his brows. He watched the brutality in the alley. Those guys. Verona's body trembled slightly. Her pupils contracted in shock. That child. Julian was curled up in the corner. His arms were wrapped tightly around his head. Tears welled in his eyes. That was the child who had called out for her help. A large man loomed over him. A hideous grin was plastered on his face. Didn't I tell you not to go wandering around? Are you playing with me? He suddenly raised his foot. He kicked the boy on the ground with full force. Hey, are you listening? The man raised his fist again. It swung down with the sound of rushing wind. However, the fist stopped abruptly midair. Louis firmly caught the man's wrist. His knuckles tightened from the exertion. There was a dull sound of impact. Louis held the man's wrist in a death grip. That's enough. The man struggled to pull his arm back. Who the hell are you? Louis's eyes were ice cold. What crime has this child committed? The man let out a sneer.
His lips curled mockingly.
The crime of offending a noble. If you don't want to get hurt, you'd better back off. Louis's gaze darkened. He suddenly applied pressure with his palm. The sound of bones snapping echoed through the man let out a shrill scream. His body twisted in agony. He collapsed onto the stone pavement. Verona stood at the entrance of the alley. She watched the scene unfold. He was even more cold-blooded than she had imagined. It looked as though he could take on the entire Imperial Knights alone. If Louis ever met Dominic, she pulled her blue hood lower. A trace of worry appeared in her eyes. Between the two of them, I'm afraid it would only end when one of them is dead. I must never let these two meet. Even though I've already warned Dominic, I'm still worried. Verona closed her eyes tightly. Her brows furrowed slightly with anxiety. Speaking of which, what is Dominic even doing right now? The burly man clutched his broken wrist. His fleshy face was distorted with rage. You bastard! Do you really think you're going to get away with this? Louis looked calm. He raised his hand to adjust the silver armor on his shoulder. That doesn't matter. Since you've done wrong, you must take responsibility for it. He took a step forward, an undeniable aura of intimidation in his eyes. Don't let me see something like this ever again. The man's body shuddered violently. He instinctively retreated a few steps. Cold sweat slid down his sideburns. The man stumbled as he fled backward, his footsteps sounding frantic and hurried in the alleyway. You'll pay for this. Verona stood there, watching the man's pathetic retreating figure. Then she turned her head toward her companion. I'd expect nothing less from you. It looks like you could become an official knight at any moment. Louis kept his eyes forward, a hint of helplessness in his voice. I believe I told you to stay back. Verona began to walk, her skirt lightly brushing against the stone floor. Because this time it's my turn. Julian was still curled up in the corner, arms wrapped tightly around his body wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't do anything wrong. Verona walked up to the boy and slowly crouched down. She softly called out Julian's name. Julian slowly lifted his head, tears welling in his eyes. His gaze was full of anxiety and a sense of grievance. Julian shrank back slightly, his eyes filled with wariness. How do you know my name? Verona watched the young boy, her voice calm and steady. I am your older cousin, Verona Rosentine. Julian's pupils contracted sharply. His breathing became labored. Are you here to warn me not to claim the Rosentine name? Verona lowered her eyes slightly, a gentle curve touching her lips. No, she raised her head, looking straight into the boy's eyes. I intend to make you the heir to the Count's family. Julian froze in place, a faint blush creeping onto his cheeks. His eyes were full of disbelief. Verona lowered her eyes slightly, observing the boy before her. I intend to make you the heir to the Count's family. Julian froze in place. A faint blush colored his cheeks. What are you talking about? Verona crouched down, meeting the gaze of the boy huddled in the corner. What I mean is, I am going to make you the Count of Rosentine. Julian snapped his head up, eyes wide with disbelief. I just wanted to ask, what on earth does that mean? Verona asked, I am older than you. Is this any way to address your cousin? Julian bit his lower lip, his body trembling slightly. What does it actually mean? What exactly are you going to do? Verona's expression was composed, her voice calm and firm. It's simple. We just need to register you in the family ledger and appoint you as the heir. Julian looked down at the ground,
his fingers gripping.
The stone bricks, but why me? The Count clearly wants to kick me out. Verona looked at the hand, whose knuckles were white with strain. Without a doubt, the blood of the Rosentine family flows within you. She slowly stood up, her blue cloak swaying with the movement. Let's go, Verona reached out her hand toward the boy. I will protect you. So, come back to the estate with me. Julian looked up, gazing at the hand suspended in the air. After a moment's hesitation, he slowly raised his arm. Their fingertips touched, and he gripped her hand firmly. Do you want something from me? Verona tilted her head slightly, a playful look in her eyes. What? I just hope you'll take care of me when I'm old. Julian stood there in a daze, his eyes full of confusion. Verona raised her hand, her fingertips gently brushing against the boy's cheek. I hate political marriages like the other nobles. Julian felt the touch on his cheek. So you're making me the heir because you don't want to get married? The corners of Verona's mouth curled up into a confident smile. That's exactly what I mean. I only hope you can repay me in the future. It's not a bad deal, is it? So will you come with me? Julian watched her in silence,
His gaze gradually turning firm.
Julian tilted his head, eyes full of incomprehension. But why do you hate political marriages so much? Verona was about to speak, but she suddenly stumbled. Losing her balance, she fell backward. Louis darted forward, his hand steadying her back. His other hand firmly gripped her arm. Are you all right? Leaning against his solid chest, Verona looked up at his face, so close to her. For a moment she fell silent. Louis' brow furrowed slightly, worry showing in his eyes. Verona slowly steadied herself, shifting her gaze away from his face. It's because among my previous blind dates, not a single one of them suited my taste and looks. Louis froze in place, an imperceptible blush tinting his cheeks. So that's how it is. He lowered his eyes somewhat helplessly. That joke went a bit too far. Deep within the alleyways, a man in a dark cloak was hidden in the shadows. His hood covered most of his face, revealing only a pair of cold, sharp eyes. He watched the three people departing in the distance. Verona led Julian down the street, with Louis following closely behind. Their footsteps echoed in the silent night. Julian Verona stopped. She looked down at the boy beside her. How is your mother doing? I heard she wasn't in good health. Julian lowered his eyes, staring at the stone road beneath his feet. She has already passed away. That's why I came to the capital. Verona let out a soft sigh. Just as I suspected. Julian looked up, a trace of anxiety in his eyes. More importantly, how do you plan on persuading the Count? Verona continued walking forward, her blue cloak fluttering slightly in the wind. Don't worry, I've already thought of a few ways. She paused for a moment, looking toward the distance. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure I can persuade father. In a life of endless burdens, I have long since understood that as long as you keep trying, things will eventually resolve themselves. If this method doesn't work, I'll try another. And if that fails too, Verona looked down at the tips of her shoes, her steps heavy in the silence. I have to stop thinking like that. Thinking that death is the end of She tightened her grip on the edge of her blue cloak, her body shivering slightly. That man's figure flickered in her mind.
He reached out to lift her chin.
His gaze cold and profound. Do you really want to die? Why did those words suddenly surface at this moment? Verona took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. In any case, for now I can only look forward. I should get back quickly. The black cat might already be waiting for me at home. Verona stopped walking, her eyes scanning the empty street. Louis Julian. Wait here for a moment. Louis looked confused. Verona pulled up her hood, hiding her vibrant red hair. Don't follow me. I won't go far. She walked through the dark alley alone. Her shoes clicked sharply against the stone tiles. Her pace quickened, until she suddenly stopped at a corner. Dominic. Dominic emerged from the shadows. A smirk curled on his lips beneath his hood. So that man is your secret. Verona stared intently at the boy in black before her. You've been following me. Then you must have heard everything. Today was the first time I met Louis too. Dominic pulled his hood lower. His lips curled into a mocking sneer. It seems you're already close enough to call each other by your first names. Verona turned her face away, avoiding his sharp gaze. Hayes, the holy night I told you about. Thinking about the future, it doesn't hurt to build a good relationship with him. Dominic's eyes darkened slightly. A hint of displeasure touched his tone. Is it really necessary to get so close to him? Verona was taken aback. What? Dominic turned around. His back was turned to the moonlight. If he really is such a magnificent holy knight, then back when that bastard from the Information Guild attacked you, he should have cut off that guy's arm immediately. Verona stopped in her tracks, staring at his back. So you really did see everything. Dominic tilted his head slightly. If you were going to make a plan like this, you could have just told me first. I'm the one who should be your partner, and the person you should trust the most. Verona gave a gentle smile. Are you worried that I'll betray you and join forces with the temple instead? That won't happen. We'll talk more later. She was about to walk away, when her wrist was suddenly caught by a strong force. Dominic gripped her hand tightly. The strength in his fingertips left no room for refusal. Verona, Dominic suddenly pulled her close. He leaned down, staring her in the eye. Look at me. Verona's body went rigid. She looked up into those cold red eyes. Her breath hitched instantly. Let go of her. Louis was standing behind them before they knew it, staring at Dominic with a cold gaze. His voice carried an unquestionable intimidation. Verona jolted. Her gaze darted between the two of them. Cold sweat trickled down her cheek. Dominic didn't let go. He just tilted his head slightly. His eyes were full of provocation. Louis confronted him expressionlessly, exuding a heavy sense of pressure. The air seemed to freeze at that moment. It's over. This is a total mess. Dominic turned his head. A chilling, killing intent flickered in his eyes. Louis didn't back down an inch, exuding a heavy sense of pressure. Verona froze where she stood. Cold sweat trickled down her cheek. This is completely over. Louis suddenly drew his sword. The silver blade flashed through the air. The tip of the sword pointed straight ahead. Dominic tilted his head back slightly, allowing the cold blade to rest against his throat. Do you think a mere holy knight can threaten me? Verona rushed between the two of them, spreading her arms to block the blade. Dominic. Stop it, Louis. You put your sword away too. Louis slowly lowered his arm, but his gaze remained fixed on the boy opposite him. This person seemed to be detaining Lady Verona by force. He sheathed his sword. His expression returned to its usual upright seriousness. I was merely fulfilling my duty to protect you. Dominic squinted at the knight. A provocative smile played on his lips. This is none of your business. Get lost. What do you think you can do with that sword? Louis's eyes grew even colder. If I use this sword to slit your throat, will you still be able to say the same thing? Dominic showed no fear, staring straight into those hostile eyes. Are you seriously looking for a fight with me? Verona squeezed her eyes shut. Veins of anger throbbed at her temples. That's quite enough. These two men. She suddenly reached out, wanting to grab the sword. Louis's eyes widened in horror. Lady Verona, this is too dangerous. Dominic was also stunned. Who would be stupid enough to grab a blade with their bare hands? Verona looked up. Her gaze swept between the two of them. It's because you won't listen to me at all. You're just focused on fighting each other. I just want to show you that if you keep fighting, who exactly is going to get hurt? Louis lowered his gaze. His expression returned to its usual uprightness. I apologize, I failed in my duty for a moment there. Verona turned around. Her skirt traced an arc across the stone pavement. Dominic, I'm going back to the Count's estate first. Dominic stood where he was. His gaze followed her figure closely. Are you planning to always prioritize that guy? Verona stopped, but she didn't look back. I told you it's not like that. I have urgent matters to attend to. She quickened her shoes clicked on the ground, making a rapid sound. I have to get these two separated first. I'll find a chance to explain clearly to Dominic later. Verona turned her head, casting a sidelong glance at the boy behind her. You have your own things to do, don't you? Well, talk when we've both finished our tasks. Dominic watched her walk away. A meaningful curve formed on his lips. Hey, the carriage wheels rolled over the stone pavement, creating a dull and rhythmic vibration. Verona sat inside the carriage, looking down at the sleeping Julian beside her. He had his eyes closed. His breathing was steady and deep. Louis broke the dead silence in the carriage. Was that man from just now an acquaintance? Verona nodded slightly. Her gaze remained on the child. Yes, but he's not anyone important. Louis looked out the window with a serious expression. In that case, it's best to keep your distance from him. I have a very bad feeling about this. Verona turned her face. A faint smile touched her lips. Thank you for your concern. She gently curled her fingers, rubbing the fabric of her cloak with her fingertips. If Louis could be a bit more flexible, maybe I could make him understand that Dominic isn't so bad. In every life, Louis has always valued justice above all else. He stared straight ahead. His tone was firm and cold. It's all right if you've done something wrong. You just have to take responsibility. There's simply no convincing him. Verona stood before the magnificent iron gates, holding Julian's hand as they stepped down from the carriage. Please, head back now. Louis stopped. He silently watched Verona. My apologies for taking up so much of your time. Verona shook her head slightly, with a hint of apology in her expression. Please come by the Count's estate again sometime. I'll prepare better medicine for you than last time. Louis instinctively reached for the pouch at his... Verona waved her hands hurriedly. This isn't a bribe. After all, you helped of your own free will. It must have been quite taxing just now. Louis stood there dazed. An imperceptible blush rose to his cheeks. You truly are a good person. Verona looked puzzled. She gazed at the night before her. Why bring this up so suddenly? Is it because I just said I would get you better medicine? Louis avoided her gaze, looking toward the garden statues in the distance. I am simply doing what I want to do. Please do not have any expectations of me. He paused for a moment, his voice sounding somewhat low in the night air. Even so, aren't you even a little worried about the ending between me and that man? Verona was at a loss for words. Louis lowered his head slightly, his profile lost in the shadows of his hair. Perhaps I have overstepped, but I am merely stating the facts. I do not expect anything from you. Miss Verona. Verona's brow furrowed slightly, her expression appearing somewhat uneasy. It's not like that. In short, that is what I meant. Suddenly, his expression became gentle and relieved.
Indeed.
I cannot use my own standards to measure your thoughts. Can I? Verona was filled with surprise. For someone as rigid as Louis, to say something like this was unexpected. Louis stood before the manor gates. If we can meet again, I would be very happy. Verona looked at the night. We might not see each other again. Louis hung his head, a trace of loneliness appearing in his eyes. I understand. Seeing his dejected state, a reassuring smile appeared on Verona's lips. Well, if you can become the most exceptional knight, the talk of the capital. Perhaps I'll come to see you out of curiosity. Louis looked up abruptly, his fighting spirit reignited. I will do my absolute best and work hard. Verona waved her hand helplessly. If you work any harder, the others might not be able to keep up. Louis thought seriously for a moment. Then I shall maintain a moderate pace. Verona let out a light laugh. Please do. All right, I should go inside. She turned around and walked toward the brightly lit mansion. Louis called out to her receding figure. If you need any help, please tell me at any time. Verona stopped in her tracks, her expression becoming grave. She had warned him to be careful of Dominic, but would everything really be all right? Draped in a dark cloak, Dominic walked quickly through the empty streets. His boots clicked sharply against the stone pavement. Two subordinates followed closely. Behind him, one lowered his voice. Master, did you see the lady you were concerned about? Dominic stopped and turned his head, a hint of gloom in his eyes. I did. Why was she with that guy? Dominic lowered his eyes, the image of Verona's back as she left surfacing in his mind. Well, talk after we've handled everything. Things seem to be getting more complicated. Verona was right. Dominic clenched his fist, his knuckles turning white. That burst of powerful holy energy earlier was certainly not something an ordinary person could possess. Even talent of that level can be easily crushed. Dominic opened his palm, and a dark red aura swirled between his fingers, hissing like a venomous snake. His eyes were cold and hollow. Should I kill him? The subordinate's voice came from behind. As you wish. Dominic paused, his boots stepping heavily on the cobblestones. He just needs to die one more time. That is all. Those voices were appearing again. Dominic's brow furrowed, his expression looking somewhat pained. Is there anything else about him I should know? He lowered his arm, and the residual red light on his fingertips faded, turning into a wisp of smoke that vanished into the cold air. Dominic stopped, his back to his subordinates. Any new developments in high society lately? No, then proceed as planned. Dominic pulled his hood down to cover most of his face. Are you going to the Imperial Palace now? Yes. A smirk played on Dominic's lips, a hint of manic determination in his eyes. Dominic tilted his head slightly, revealing a confident and dangerous smile. That's right, I'm taking back everything that belongs to me. The next day, sunlight bathed the grand manor. Rose followed closely behind Verona, asking in a panicked tone, My lady, are you sure about this? Is it really okay? Without informing the Count, allowing him to enter the estate like this, I don't think it's wise. Verona stopped and looked back at Rose. I'm telling you, everything will be fine. Verona opened the door. Julian looked down at his clothes, speaking with a hint of awkwardness. Ah, sister, I don't think this outfit really suits me. Verona led Rose into the room, gazing at the young boy. Not at all. These clothes suit you perfectly. Verona walked through the spacious gallery, her skirt brushing against the wooden floor. I'll talk to father when he returns. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. Julian was somewhat uneasy. But last night, the maids were gossiping. Who is he? Julian noticed their stares, his body trembling slightly, as he looked to the side in discomfort. That hair color, is he from a branch of the family? Now that the Count did have a younger sister. Don't tell me she's... Julian recalled Verona's words. What if they try to kick me out again? Verona placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. Listen to me, this is where you belong. No matter what, the fact that your mother was once cast out doesn't change that. Didn't you come here wanting to be a member of the Rosentine family? Julian fell into a brief silence before speaking. I only came here to see my family. I don't want the position of heir, because I already have nothing left. Verona looked at him firmly. Perhaps I can't give you the kind of family you want. It might be hard to change my father's mind, but I will do everything in my power. I have already decided. After bringing you here, I will cherish you and protect you. Julian made his decision. Then I will trust you. I don't know if I deserve this, But still, Verona interrupted. That doesn't matter right now. I have no intention of burdening you, nor do I have any high expectations of you. Julian said worriedly, but I don't know anything. What if my actions cause the family to fall apart? Rose stifled a giggle behind them. Verona thought to herself, first, I need to find a tutor who can teach him proper etiquette. She held up a finger. If you don't understand, I will explain everything to you one by one. First, do not trust others easily. Julian asked, does that mean I can only trust you, sister? Verona denied it. No, don't trust me either. That is simply the norm for noble families. Her tone shifted. But you can trust me just a little bit. She thought, Julian looks like a chick without its mother hen. Verona ended the conversation. Now get some rest. I'll call a doctor for you immediately. Julian said happily. All right. Verona took one last look back at Julian, then walked out of the room. Rose pulled her into a tight hug. Verona was taken aback. Rose choked up with pride. It seems I've always seen you as just a child. And yet, you've grown into such a fine young woman. I am so lucky to be in your service, my lady. Verona spoke with a smile. Rose, you can treat me like a child whenever you want. I have no one to rely on but you. The Count's enraged voice echoed from a distance. What is the meaning of this? Verona remarked. It seems father has returned. I'm going to see him. Rose cheered her on. Yes, my lady. I sincerely wish you the best of luck. Verona stepped out of the room. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the corridor. She saw a familiar face up ahead and called out, Roderick. Roderick responded cheerfully. This was Lord Roderick, her father's aide. Verona asked. He looks quite frustrated. Where have you two been? Roderick hesitated. He was a capable aide, but Verona coaxed him with a smile. You know, I won't tell on you. You should know that I trust you. Roderick struggled internally, but eventually he gave in. He leaned in close to Verona's ear and whispered a warning. Please promise me that you won't tell the Count about this.
His Majesty urgently summoned the high nobility this morning.
It's reported that his missing nephew has returned and has inherited the title of Duke of Loch-Lorraine. Verona was stunned. Dominic has already made his. Roderick continued. They say His Majesty verified it himself. The Count seems baffled as well. Of all times, for this to happen, just as the Crown Prince is trying to consolidate his position. It's happening. It's likely true. After all, my father supports the Crown Prince. Even though I was the one who set this in motion, just so he could reclaim his status overnight. I wonder what he discussed with the Emperor. Roderick asked, By the way, why are you here? Verona explained, I'm here to speak with my father about something. Roderick nodded. I see. The Count is inside. Verona reached for the doorknob. I'm curious about how things stand, but I can't let Dominic get too far ahead of me. Roderick watched Verona enter the room, his gaze carrying a hint of scrutiny. The Count held his forehead in frustration. Roderick, I told you, we can talk about this later. He realized something was off and looked up at the visitor. Verona, do you need something? Verona smiled, Father. I have something I need to discuss with you. I have selected the heir to our family. The Count stood up, energized. So you've finally decided to get married? Verona continued, No, that is not the case. Are you aware of a child named Julian? The Count's expression shifted instantly upon hearing the name. Julian, that's impossible. You can't be serious. Verona placed a hand over her heart. I am talking about Julian. Rosentime. The Count's back stiffened abruptly, his voice cracking with extreme shock. Julian, could it be that child? Verona stood quietly by the door, her expression composed and firm. That's right, Julian. I intend for that child to become the heir to this earldom. The Count braced his hands on the desk, leaning his body forward. How do you know about Julian? Verona walked toward the desk. I happened to cross paths with him while I was out yesterday. Since he looks so much like me, My intuition told me he was the one. As it turned out, my hunch was correct. However, he was being attacked by a group of men at the time. The Count's pupils contracted sharply, panic bleeding through his voice. Attacked why? Verona tilted her head slightly, a cold smile playing on her lips. Who knows? Father, you didn't give that order yourself, did you? I only ordered him to be driven out of the noble district. The Count clenched his fists, his knuckles trembling from the force. Even so, he is the son of a traitor to this family. I will never acknowledge him as a member of this house. Verona watched her angry father quietly, her tone as flat as water. But that person is no longer with us. This anger is pointless. Julian is a gifted child. With proper guidance, he will certainly become an excellent heir. Verona turned her head slightly, her expression radiating an undeniable authority. Father, please take this opportunity to become a wise count for once. The Count furrowed his brows deeply. After everything that's happened, that's impossible. Verona stared at the Count. She didn't completely fail to understand her father's feelings. Countless fingers had pointed at this grand mansion, and gossip had spread like thorns. His sister running off with a commoner knight had brought ruin to the family's reputation. But even so, this is not something a man who betrayed my mother has the right to say. The Count used to put his arm around his mistress, handing her jewelry boxes with a beaming face. While he was extravagantly pampering an outsider, Mother was single-handedly supporting the crumbling household. While gorgeous jewelry and high heels were scattered about, they couldn't mask the scent of decay. To fill the financial voids, Mother eventually died of exhaustion. A cold coffin lay amidst the flowers, the carvings on the cross clearly visible. Until her final breath, she exhausted her life for this family. Even the mistress he doted on eventually ran off with the money, leaving only a cold farewell letter. Father not only lost his health, but he also dragged the Rosentine family's prestige to rock bottom. Verona stood in the center of the study, watching the decadent man behind the desk. I am equally concerned about this family. We must not let Rosentine fall into those people's hands. The heir should at least be someone who knows how to respect you. The Count avoided his daughter's gaze, rubbing his temples tiredly. Prepare a room for the child first. As for formal registration, well, I'll decide that later. Verona narrowed her eyes slightly, her tone carrying a hint of judgment. Then, regarding the attack on Julian, how do you plan to handle it? Was it really not your order? The Count slumped back into his chair, with a heavy thud. It seems letting Roderick hire just anyone was a mistake. As long as the child isn't seriously injured, it's fine. You should also learn when to keep your mouth shut. Verona stared at the man before her, her gaze turning completely cold. So he intends to just brush it off like this. Even though the real suspect is right by his side, Father's judgment really can't be relied upon. Verona walked through the empty corridor, her skirt billowing in the shifting light. Although his wording was vague, it meant he had at least acknowledged Julian. Julian is now a member of the family. She lowered her eyes slightly, her thoughts racing through her mind. The most pressing matter had been resolved. Next, she should go see Dominic. Steady footsteps approached from behind, accompanied by a gentle call. My lady. Verona stopped in her track. She turned her head to see who it was. Roderick walked in with a smile on his face. Did the conversation go smoothly? Verona nodded slightly. I suppose so. Did something happen? Roderick stopped a step away, with an impeccable smile on his face. It's not just your voices. They could be heard even from outside. I heard that you met that child named Julian. Verona's fingers trembled suddenly, her fingertips brushing against the cold fabric. Roderick continued to step forward, looking increasingly curious. I've never seen him before, so I couldn't help but be interested. Verona watched him in silence, her breathing becoming slightly hurried. It was useless for him to play innocent. She already knew everything that had happened. She lifted her chin slightly, locking her gaze on him like a sharp blade. A cold scrutiny showed in her eyes. After her mother passed away, Roderick was hired to revitalize the Count's family. He stood with his back to the light, with his hands folded behind his back. But in truth, deep down, he harbored the ambition to take over the entire family. Once her father passed away, he even planned to forge a will and force her into marriage with him. Verona gripped the letter in her hand tightly, her fingertips trembling with rage. If he only wanted the title, she might not have loathed him this much. Roderick bowed his head slightly, a faint curve on the corner of his mouth. But now, it was impossible for her not to notice that slimy, disgusting gaze. Verona turned away abruptly, avoiding his revolting stare. Father will speak with you about this personally very soon. Roderick reached out, his fingertips lightly touching her sleeve. I would rather hear it directly from your own lips. My lady? Roderick leaned down, close to Verona's ear. Our relationship is already close enough, isn't it? Steady footsteps echoed in the hall. The attendant stopped in his tracks, gazing forward with a stern look. Mr. Aide. Roderick straightened up suddenly, a trace of displeasure flashing across his face. The attendant stood there expressionless. The Count is looking for you. Roderick frowned slightly, appearing somewhat confused. The Count? There shouldn't be anything else for today. The attendant suddenly reached out, gripping Roderick's wrist tightly. His strength was startling. The Count said it is urgent. Roderick tried to break free, but found the other's fingers like iron pincers. He could only barely maintain his composure. I understand. I'll go now. He turned around and walked quickly toward the end of the hallway. The attendant stood quietly by Verona's side, watching the figure completely disappear around the corner. Verona stared at the stranger in front of her, her eyes filled with deep wariness. Thank you, but I don't know you. May I ask who you are? Dominic let out a soft sigh, reaching up to undo the button at his collar.
He brushed back his messy black hair,
revealing those deep reddish-brown eyes. What about now? Do you recognize me? Verona's eyes widened suddenly, her breath catching in her throat. Dominic. She instinctively reached out, her fingertips touching his warm palm. Dominic took her hand in return, pulling her forcefully into the room. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind them, releasing a dull thud. Verona looked around, still shaken. When did you get in here? Dominic lowered his head slightly, his gaze falling on their interlaced hands. Is there a problem? Verona urgently grabbed his sleeve, warning him in a low voice. You're no longer just Dom. You are the Duke of Lochlerin. Got it? Dominic interrupted her. Please stop. Verona looked at him, puzzled. He bowed his head slightly, shadows masking half of his face. At least don't call me that. When you call me that, it always feels like you're trying to distance yourself from me on purpose. When you call me that, it always feels like you're trying to distance yourself from me on purpose. Verona turned her head away slightly, avoiding his intense gaze. Since yesterday, things have felt a bit off. In this empire, no one would want to keep their distance from the Duke. A faint smile hung on his lips, but his tone was somewhat playful. Even those noble ladies are probably eyeing the position of Duchess right now. Dominic took a step forward, closing the gap between them. So, what about you? Verona froze on the spot. I have no interest in marriage. Verona turned around abruptly, her skirt fluttering in the air. Don't say such things so lightly. Dominic caught her hand. I'm serious. Verona raised her face, gazing into his eyes so close to hers. Are you joking? But your eyes look so sincere. Dominic silently lowered his gaze, his expression turning solemn. What are you really thinking? There is indeed someone I've been quite concerned about lately. Verona turned away, avoiding his follow-up question. Dominic's brow furrowed slightly, his voice carrying a subtle trace of tension. Who is it? It's Julian. I'm very curious about Julian. Dominic stood there, stunned, his face filled with confusion. Why mention that guy all of a sudden? Verona leaned close, a playful smile on her lips. What, do you hate it when I get close to others? I brought you here to resolve the marriage contract issue. I don't intend to betray you. So don't worry. Dominic looked at her. That's not what I'm worried about. Verona turned her head slightly. Then what are you worried about? Dominic's expression appeared somewhat hesitant. It's just that I don't like it, when there are things about you that I don't know. Verona's figure surfaced in his mind. Those unreachable secrets, like they were behind a thin mist. Verona was stunned, a hint of wavering flashing in her eyes. If you get any closer, I'll be the one who's troubled. After all, you aren't the villain of this novel. You don't know how many lives I have left. If I form a deep bond with you in this life, I won't be able to kill you without hesitation in the future. Just how many people do you intend to drag into your life? Dominic reached out, twining a strand of her red hair around his fingers. My life is simple. I never intended to drag anyone into it. He gently caressed the hair, his movements delicate and slow. Are you really so sure about that? A knock sounded at the door. Sister, are you in there? Verona jerked back, her expression turning frantic. Julian was outside. Dominic frowned slightly, a hint of displeasure in his voice. Why not just send him away? Verona shook her head, placing her hands against his chest and pushing him back firmly. I am the only one that child can rely on now. I could never do that. Dominic let out a low grumble, looking somewhat irritated. Hay's not a 5-year-old child. Verona steadied her breathing and spoke softly toward the closed door. Come in, Julian. The door creaked open slightly, and Julian peeked, his eyes full of unease. Am I interrupting the two of you? Verona walked quickly to the window and pulled open the heavy curtains. Not at all. I just wanted to air out the room. Julian asked nervously. So, how did the talk with the Count go? Verona leaned down. Everything went smoothly. I heard Hayes preparing a room for you, and Hayes even hiring a tutor. Julian snapped his head up, disbelief shining in his eyes. Is it true? He immediately lowered his eyes again, a look of worry crossing his face. Verona bent down to meet the boy's gaze. Is there something bothering you? Julian wrung his fingers, fidgeting nervously with the hem of his clothes. Can I really live well in the Count's house? Until now, I've only ever been a commoner. If I make a huge mistake at a ball, or something like that. Verona waved her hand dismissively. It's fine. Even among adults, there are plenty of nobles like that. Her smile faded, and her expression turned serious. Don't tell me you don't want to be the heir? Julian shook his head quickly, his cheeks flushing with emotion. No, it's not that. For my mother's sake, I want to rightfully reclaim everything that belongs to me. I just didn't want to take sister's place. Verona let out a soft laugh, looking perfectly composed. If I had wanted that title, I would have taken it long ago. So don't worry. She reached out and gently patted the boy's head. Julian felt the warmth of her palm, his face turning slightly red. I'll work hard to become a great and then I'll protect sister. I'll never let anyone take you away. Verona froze in place, her mouth twitching awkwardly. Well, that's certainly. Dominic remained hidden behind the door, staring gloomily at the boy. Verona sensed his gaze, a bead of cold sweat forming on her temple. Just, how long do you plan on standing there? Julian looked up, confused. Is something wrong, sister? Verona quickly masked her expression, forcing a faint smile. No, it's nothing. Julian gave a polite smile and bowed slightly. Forgive the sudden interruption. I'll take my leave now. He turned and ran off, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. Verona watched the small figure disappear. The door slammed shut. Dominic stepped out from the shadows and stood by Verona's side. You should be stricter with him. As he is now, Hayes completely useless. The title practically fell into his lap. What is he so worried about? Verona turned her head, staring forward with a calm expression. The human heart isn't that simple. Your Grace, I will look after Julian, so please don't worry about him. Dominic snorted coldly. He's the heir you chose. I have every right to care, but I want to know, exactly what are you to him? If this continues, That brat will become a burden to you sooner or later. For some reason, it sounds like you're worried about me. I never expected Dominic to have such a side. Verona tilted her head slightly, observing the man beside her. Don't be childish. It's because you always appear out of nowhere that I have to cut my conversations short. If you were to make a formal, I might be able to make some time for you. Dominic fell into a brief contemplation. If I make a formal request, will you really listen? Verona was stunned, a look of shock in her eyes. The next morning, sunlight bathed the magnificent manor buildings. You've truly lost your mind. Verona covered her mouth with her hand, whispering in disbelief. Rose stopped her work, looking a bit uneasy. My lady, did I do something wrong? No, it's not your fault. Verona held the letter tightly in her hand, a bead of cold sweat forming on her temple. The problem is, to the cold and ruthless you, what is this supposed to mean? Verona stared at the handwriting on the card, her brow furrowing slightly. Rose's cheeks flushed. Just who is pursuing you so passionately? Verona slammed the letter onto the table, her tone cold. I don't know, and I'm not interested. Rose leaned in closer, her eyes full of curiosity. What exactly does the letter say? It's absolute rubbish. Rose wore a meaningful smile. I see. It seems you know exactly who sent it. You're just not satisfied with the sender. She pulled a rose from the flower basket, her fingers lightly brushing the petals, with a gentle, practiced motion. Verona glanced sideways at her. You seem quite happy about this. Rose hummed a tune as she trimmed the flower. If you truly hated that person, you would have had me throw these things out long ago. She placed the rose back in its place, looking pleased. Since you didn't order me to toss them, it means your impression of him isn't actually that bad? Verona lowered her eyes, her fingertips grazing a rose petal, with a hint of hesitation. You can leave now. Dominic stared at the woman before him. I came all this way to see you, only to be heartlessly driven away like this. You really are a heartless woman. Verona's voice remained calm. Haven't you had enough? If you're just here to spout nonsense, you should spend your time on something more meaningful. Dominic let out a light laugh and took a step forward, his shoes clicking against the stone path. Since you're always trying to build walls, I'll just have to tear them down myself. He suddenly closed the distance, cupping the back of Verona's head with one hand, and leaned down to plant a kiss on her forehead. The action was dominant, yet tender. Verona's eyes widened in shock, her body freezing in place. What are you doing? Dominic didn't back down. Instead, he leaned in even closer, a possessive fire in his eyes. I told you I would tear down your walls. Dominic turned around, a playful curve touching the corners of his lips. No further text provided. I'll be back for a formal visit soon. Verona pressed her hand to her forehead, her fingertips trembling slightly. In that moment just now, she actually couldn't bring herself to push him away. Even though she knew he was just talking nonsense, those trivial bits of conversation had felt unexpectedly pleasant. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart giving a violent throb. Get it together? Verona, Hay's a villain through and through. Even in this next life, there's no guarantee this relationship will last. I absolutely cannot let my guard down. 1 week later, Julian stood by the table, looking up at her. Should I tell him not to send anything over anymore? Verona narrowed her eyes slightly, a knowing smile on her lips. And how did you know about that? Julian was stunned for a moment, his eyes darting around. That is, a deliberate cough came from behind. Rose entered carrying a tea tray. It seems the two of you have become quite close this week. Verona turned her head toward Rose as she poured the tea, giving a helpless smile. Julian, don't worry about me. What you should focus on right now is eating well. You need to grow up quickly. Julian puffed out his chest. I'm not a child anymore. Verona watched him tenderly and chimed in softly. That's right, you'll grow up very soon. Hay's only just begun his education. yet his every gesture is already that of a young noble. Julian's eyes sparkled, his expression becoming cheerful. Really? Oh, by the way, the aide said he would arrange a swordsmanship instructor for me. The smile on Verona's face froze instantly. Roderick, what exactly is he planning? She composed herself, her tone turning serious. Julian, do you remember the first thing I told you? Julian answered somewhat hesitantly. Don't trust anyone, except sister. Verona nodded slightly. Correct, especially that aide. Hay's the one who hurt you before. Julian's body jolted, his face turning pale. Is that so? I didn't know. Verona reached out and patted his shoulder. Now that, you must be extra careful in the future. She looked away, toward the empty courtyard, a hint of worry on her face. But isn't she arriving a bit too late? Davian sat in the carriage, feeling a bit disgruntled. Verona hasn't contacted me for days. I have to get to the bottom of this when I see her today. She glanced to that was the crest of the Duke of Lochleven. Davian looked back, and continued walking quickly toward the parlor. She had heard the Duke's estate was preparing a grand ball. To celebrate the succession of the new Duke, she pushed open the heavy wooden door, but her steps halted abruptly as she saw the scene inside. A hearty laugh came from her father's room. Of course! It is an immense honor that you would deliver the invitation in person. Dominic bowed slightly, his tone steady and polite. I am here today representing the Duke's estate. The Duke himself hopes to pay a visit in person in the future. Davian's father gave a gentle smile and nodded. Understood, then we shall see each other at the ball. He turned his head toward his daughter standing in the doorway. Davian, come here and greet him properly. This is a knight from the Duchy of Lochleven. Dominic turned, his gaze sweeping over the young woman at the door. Davian gripped the doorframe, her fingertips pressing hard. Hay's a knight from Lochleven. She stared at the black-haired man, an unusual ripple of emotion rising in her heart. This sense of pressure is certainly not something an ordinary knight would possess. Davian ran quickly to the garden, a bright smile on her face. Verona, she lunged forward and grabbed her friend's hands tightly. Why haven't you contacted me? I couldn't wait any longer, so I just ran over to see you. Looking at Davian's pure, smiling face, Verona felt a sense of peace. This is Davian. Just seeing her smile calms my heart. That's exactly why the Dominic of the original novel would go as far as becoming a villain, just to have her. Verona gave an apologetic smile. I'm sorry, I've had some urgent matters to handle lately. Davian shook her head gently. It's fine, but next time, even if it's just a quick, please let me know in advance. Dominic turned his head, a deep smile on his lips. Verona shook off her thoughts, glad that she had prevented the two of them from meeting. But you really are a bit late today. Did something happen? Davian took her friend's arm and softly mentioned what she had just seen. A knight from the Duchy of Lochleven came by just now. He seemed to be delivering a ball invitation. He was incredibly handsome. For a moment, I even thought he was the Duke himself. Verona's expression shifted, and she pressed further. Really, what did he look like? Davian recalled the man's appearance. He had black hair and a pair of unforgettable red eyes. Verona's pupils shrank. Black hair and red eyes. She whirled around and grabbed Davian's shoulders firmly. You met him? Davian was startled by the sudden reaction and answered hesitantly yes. Yes, why? Is something wrong? Verona's face turned pale. Her breathing quickened. Why? Why was Dominic there? Verona gripped the other woman's arm, her expression tense. Did you meet that man? Davian was shocked by the sudden force. Yes, she responded hesitantly. Verona didn't let go, her tone becoming even more urgent. And then what else did he say? She let go of her hand, her gaze dropping to the floor. Her expression became grim. That Imperial Guard was actually Dominic. If Davian has caught his eye, it's over. Davian watched her friend warily and asked softly, Did something special happen? We only talked for a bit. We were talking about you. Verona looked confused. About me, Devian turned toward the distant courtyard. That man said he was going to the Rosentine Count's estate in the afternoon. So when I mentioned I was your friend, he asked me about you. Verona pressed further, uneasy. Is that really all? They didn't ask anything about you? Devian nodded. Of course. We didn't even make eye contact. Verona nodded slowly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Right, that makes sense. Dominic only becomes interested in Devian because of the appearance of the stigmata. Although they weren't completely without contact before then, becoming the Sengses was the real turning point. After all, her presence is not something that can be easily erased. Verona watched her friend's retreating figure and asked in a low voice, "When is the ball at the Duke's estate?" Devian stopped in her tracks. 2 weeks, Verona repeated the date. 2 weeks later, the original story, that ball was where the two of them first met. If by then, Dominic still has no interest in her, will everything really change? Devian came to a halt. She looked toward a nearby cluster of bush. Verona, who is that child hiding over there? Verona followed her gaze. That's my cousin. Julian was hiding behind the greenery. Only half his body was peeking out. He was watching timidly, staring straight ahead. Devian leaned down. She greeted him with a gentle voice. Hello, Julian. I'm Devian Cilia. I'm a friend of Verona's. Julian's cheeks turned a faint shade of red. He awkwardly fidgeted with his fingers. Ah, hello. Verona seemed to suddenly remember something. She turned her head to look at her friend. Devian, you mentioned before that your brother is very skilled in swordsmanship. Right, Devian was slightly taken aback. That's true, but a flash of determination crossed Verona's eye. If it's Devian's family, they are definitely people I can trust. Actually, I'm looking for a swordsmanship teacher for Julian. If your brother is willing, young lady. A brown-haired man suddenly appeared from behind. He interrupted their conversation. The butler bowed slightly. He made an announcement to the two ladies. A guest from the Duke of Lochleren's estate has arrived. Dominic raised his hand. He gently brushed back the stray hairs on his forehead. A composed smile played on his lips. It is a pleasure to meet you. Miss Verona Rosen. Tyne. Verona's body suddenly stiffened. Her breathing nearly stopped in that moment. She forced herself to calm down. She gazed at the black-haired man before her. I heard you came from the Duke of Lochleren's estate. Devian looked back and forth between the two. There was a hint of curiosity in her tone. Lord Dominic, could it be that you and Verona already knew each other? Dominic bowed slightly. His tone was steady and polite. Not at all. This is our very first meeting. Dominic watched the two young women. I heard you were heading this way. Since that's the case, I'll keep this brief. He pulled an exquisite envelope from his breast pocket. He held it out to Verona. His Grace, the Duke of Lochleren, will soon be hosting a ball. If you would grace the Duke's estate with your presence, it would be a great honor. Verona reached out and took the invitation. Her fingertips touched the cold wax seal. I would be more than happy to accept this invitation. She clutched the letter to her chest. Her lips maintained a polite curve. Is there anything else? Dominic did not leave immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. I happened to overhear just now that you seem to be looking for a swordsmanship teacher. Devian blinked. Her expression showed a hint of surprise. That is true. Why do you ask? Dominic placed his hand over his heart. He bowed slightly. A meaningful smile appeared on his face. Then, how about me? Verona's eyes widened suddenly. Lord Dominic, why would you do that? Dominic lowered his eyelids slightly. His tone carried a hint of humility. Did you not help a lost man like me just a while ago, my lady? I simply wish to repay that kindness. Devian cupped her face with her hands. Her expression grew excited. Oh my goodness! It turns out you two are already so close. Verona's face instantly turned pale. That look in her eyes. Don't tell me she. Think she can play matchmaker with me and Dominic? She spun around abruptly. She grabbed Devian's arm. She tried to pull her friend away from the scene. How could I possibly trouble such a busy person? Dominic turned his head. A confident smile curled on his lips. It's no trouble at all. Thanks to the Duke's consideration, I have plenty of time now. Verona gritted her teeth. Her gaze held a touch of coldness. It seems you have a very merciful master. Dominic accepted the sarcasm with ease. He even seemed somewhat proud. Yes, it is my honor to serve him. Davian leaned close to Verona's ear. She whispered in a low voice. Using your cousin as an excuse is just a cover, isn't it? Maybe the one Hayes actually interested in is you. Why not give him a chance? Verona sighed helplessly. Davian, it's really not what you think. Julian ran out from his hiding place. He came to a light-footed stop before everyone. My swordsmanship teacher? Julian looked up. His eyes sparkled with anticipation. Is one of the Duke's guardian knights really going to teach me swordsmanship? Verona looked at her young cousin. Remembering that his father had also been a knight, she felt a ripple of emotion in her heart. Dominic knelt on one knee. He looked the boy in the eye. If I have permission, I can evaluate your basic stance right now. Julian held his breath. Can I really? Verona let out a helpless sigh. Seeing the longing on her cousin's face, she finally softened her heart. Go on, show him. Julian jumped up in excitement. Thank you, sister. I'll go get my wooden sword right now. He turned around. He ran off with light, quick steps, leaving Verona and Dominic to face each other. Verona stepped forward in her heels. Her hem swayed gently with her movement. I will discuss this matter with my father. Dominic straightened up. His hand slid away from his knee. Then, may I visit at a set time every day? Verona suddenly leaned close to his face. She whispered low in his ear. Do as you please. In any case, these days will only last until the day your true identity is revealed. She stood tall again. A flawless social smile was fixed on her face. I look forward to our future cooperation, Lord Dominic. Sunlight spilled onto the long table laden with desserts. Red flowers bloomed quietly in the vase. Everything seemed peaceful and serene. Night fell quietly. Moonlight pierced through the clouds, shrouding the grand palace complex. Inside the empty hall, light and shadow intertwined between the stone pillars. A solemn air hung in the silence. Louis stood alone in the empty temple. With his back to the door, he pressed his folded hands to his chin. He lowered his head in deep thought. He slowly opened his eyes. A trace of loneliness lingered in his gaze. Verona's figure surfaced in his mind. I hope that one day we can meet again. His eyes were filled with struggle and unease. I shouldn't have any more to do with that person. But Louis suddenly frowned. His gaze fell upon the floor. This feels really wrong. He lowered his head. He stared at an abrupt, dark smudge on the floor. HM, why is there a stain here? Louis knelt on one knee. He leaned down to observe it closely. His finger gently touched the shadow. Louis's pupils contracted sharply. A bead of cold sweat broke out on his temple. Wait, please don't tell me this is...
He slowly lifted his right hand.
His fingertips were stained with a thick, dark substance. That stain seemed to have a life of its own, continuously spreading across the skin. There is no mistaking this evil aura. It is dark magic. To think it has already infiltrated this place. Louis knelt on one knee and touched the ground with his fingertips. There is a stain on the floor. Could it be this? He shuddered and turned his head to look at the trace on his fingertips.
Dark magic.
Steady footsteps echoed through the corridor from a distance. The door was pushed open. A priest walked in slowly. Louis stood up and looked toward the figure at the end of the corridor. High priest, please come this way. Louis stepped aside, gesturing to the priest beside him. Please, look at this. The priest leaned down and stared at the residue on the floor. This is indeed a trace of dark magic. Louis's brow furrowed. How dare they defile the holy temple? Has something like this happened before? The priest's expression grew solemn. Recently, reports of dark mages appearing throughout the empire have surged. I'm afraid similar news will soon spread in the capital. There has even been an incident involving missing sacred artifacts from the temple. Louis clenched his fists. They must be plotting something. The high priest looked at the knight before him. This concerns the dignity of the temple. Louis, start investigating this matter tomorrow. Uncover the identities of these dark mages hiding like rats, and eliminate them completely. Louis lowered his head slightly. With a solemn understood, he turned and walked through the long corridor of towering stone pillars. His footsteps echoed through the empty building. He looked down at the documents in his hand, his expression growing increasingly grim. On the third day of the investigation, Louis discovered a common thread among the missing artifacts. First, they were items of little importance to the temple. Second, even if they were sold on the market, they wouldn't fetch much money. He lowered his gaze, staring at the records in his hand. Could it be? Is this not the necklace used to detect soul corruption? Dark mages. Would they really use magic for something like this? What exactly is the reason? Louis walked down the street, his boots clicking against the stone tiles. There is something wrong with the ground. These items cannot bring them any substantial benefit. He stopped in his tracks, resting his hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist. He fell into deep thought. Louis leaned against a stone pillar. Could it be that this wasn't done by dark mages? He stopped abruptly. His gaze locked onto the path ahead. At the end of the corridor sat a figure draped in a dark cloak. Who's there? The hand beneath the cloak twitched suddenly. Fingertips curled in shock. The person quickly stood up and fled deeper into the corridor. Louis immediately gave chase. Hey, stop! He took long strides, his boots thumping heavily on the stone steps. He fixed his eyes on the retreating back. Stop right there. Louis ran through an archway, sweat forming on his brow. His eyes were locked on the target. He couldn't let them escape. Louis looked around. Gone. How is that possible? To vanish so quickly. He stopped. His gaze fell under the empty archway. A body. There's a body. The crisp sound of wooden swords clashing echoed. Julien gripped the hilt tightly, panting heavily. Fine beads of sweat broke out on his forehead. Dominic steadily parried the attack, a gentle smile on his face. Impressive. In just 3 days, your swordsmanship has improved to this extent. Julien looked up, his eyes sparkling. Really? The two stood side by side in the courtyard. Sunlight bathed the lawn. Dominic put away the wooden sword, looking at the boy beside him. Verona stood in the courtyard, watching the figures in the distance. What is he plotting this time? The butler stepped to her side. He bowed slightly. My lady, a guest has arrived. Verona turned her head, with a look of surprise. A guest, who could it be? I haven't made any appointments. She turned back, looking toward the entrance. Louis stood by the carriage. His profile appeared somewhat cold and stern. Verona walked up quickly. Louis, why have you come so suddenly without word? Louis looked at her. It's been a long time. How have you been lately? Verona gave an awkward smile. Well, more or less. Actually, a lot has happened. She looked at him with some confusion. But why are you standing outside? Want you come in and sit for a while? Louis's expression was grave. Miss Verona, a dark mage has appeared in the capital. Verona's body shuddered. Her pupils contracted in shock. The person's true identity hasn't been uncovered yet.
But
since a body corrupted by dark magic was found, I came specifically to warn you. Please be sure to stay vigilant during this time. She lowered her eyes, avoiding his gaze. I see. Thank you, Louis nodded slightly. Then I'll chip back and continue the investigation. I'll visit again next time. He turned around and nimbly boarded the carriage. The wheels rolled over the ground, making a dull sound. Verona stood still, watching the carriage pull away. Her back looked tense and heavy. Verona spun her head around. She looked behind her with a panicked expression. A body corrupted by dark magic was found. Dominic stood on the porch, staring ahead with a cold expression. How ridiculous. Verona walked quickly up to him. She looked up and stared into his eyes. Could it be that you did this? Dominic turned his face slightly, avoiding her gaze. What benefit would doing such a thing bring me? He lowered his eyelids, his gaze turning deep and cold. It's just that I thought of someone. Dominic turned his head slightly. A hint of hesitation flickered in his eyes. I just thought of someone. Verona stopped. She turned to look at the man beside her. Thought of someone? Who are you referring to? Dominic fell into a distant memory. That would be the teacher who taught me dark magic. A figure draped in a dark cloak, exuding a dangerous aura before an altar. He pulled himself back to the present. He shook his head gently. Even if it isn't that person, Dominic looked silently into the distance. His expression grew increasingly solemn. Verona sensed something was wrong. She pressed him. What exactly is going on? Dominic asked. You can foresee the future, can't you? Verona's shoulders jerked. A flash of panic crossed her eyes. Since that's the case, why are you pretending to know nothing about this? She stammered, avoiding his gaze. Well, it's not like I can see the entire future. If I really had that kind of power, I would have become a Senxus long ago. Dominic looked away. He stepped forward. More importantly, Julian is still waiting for you. Let's head back quickly. Verona watched his receding back, following silently behind. Her long hair swayed gently with her footsteps. Dominic passed through the grand golden gates, his expression returning to its usual calm. The Duke's mansion was brightly lit under the night sky. The entire building looked solemn and serene in the moonlight. Dominic sat alone in a magnificent armchair, his legs crossed. He was lost in thought, his expression grim. To think Verona didn't even know something so common. It's truly strange. From his coat, he took out an exquisite dark green jewelry box. His fingertips lightly brushed the lid, and then he slowly opened it. Inside was a ring set with a massive gemstone. She even knew that this ring was a memento from my mother. Dominic snapped the jewelry box shut. He leaned back against the chair, his eyes filled with scrutiny and suspicion. So why is Verona hiding her abilities? He narrowed his eyes slightly, his gaze landing on the space ahead. A familiar figure emerged from the void. Verona sat quietly on a bench, her long hair falling like a waterfall. Her posture was elegant and composed, as if she were actually present in the room. Dominic stared at the vision, a cold curve tugging at the corners of his mouth. Even if it's just a phantom, it looks quite real. He stood up and looked directly at the illusory presence. What is it you want this time? Verona lowered her eyes, her expression filled with a sense of solemnity. You will regret this, Dominic Lucklearn. Dominic sat behind the large desk, turning his head to look at the vision and more riddles. Say something I can understand. He stood up and walked toward the center of the room. I don't understand why you're seeking your own death. Dominic came to a halt, leaning forward slightly. His eyes were locked on the woman before him. As I said before, I don't understand. A cold light gleamed in his eyes. Is there any reason not to? Dominic's phantom began to glow with faint specks of light, as if wrapped in some kind of magic. Look at it another way. Count Rosentine, using bestowed power to get what you want. What's wrong with that? Isn't that right? Dominic stared blankly at the visions on both sides. What is going on? The phantom of Dominic walked straight through the real Dominic. Am I in the middle of a dream? Dominic's Adam's apple bobbed. His expression grew more solemn. Even though he knew this was all a hallucination, why did this feeling feel so familiar? These bizarre visions lasted for several days. Dominic stood at a street corner, watching Dominic and Verona walk off together. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the pair. He turned his head slightly, his gaze deep with inquiry. In this false vision, I took a profound interest in Verona. To get her attention, he had tried countless times. Dominic blocked her path, his eyes filled with blatant possessiveness. I want everything you are. Verona lifted her skirt, walking away without a backward glance. That is a wish you will never fulfill in this lifetime. He stopped. A playful smile tugged at his lips. In this world, there must be some things that simply cannot be achieved. Verona stared straight ahead, her expression confident and fearless. Where does this certainty come from? Dominic reached out. For a woman I cannot control. Until one day, I realized that the real me feels the exact same way. Dominic stared at his own palm, his expression growing increasingly heavy. Dominic suddenly clenched his fist. Is there a connection between me and the version of me in the vision? What is the relationship between me and my future self? If that isn't the future, could it be my past? Dominic's pupils constricted. The version of him in the vision spoke. Are you giving up just like that? In reality, he looked around at the desolate, withered trees, his expression somber. What is it this time? Dominic held a longsword, the tip pointing straight at Verona, who was slumped on the ground. She leaned against a cold rock, her head hanging low with exhaustion. Sorry, I'm already exhausted. Verona reached out and grasped the cold blade, letting the sharp edge press against her palm. Dominic's eyes widened in horror, his breathing becoming ragged. What are you doing? Verona gripped the blade with both hands. Blood snaked down through her fingers, soaking her sleeves. I'm looking for death, obviously. She looked up, a look of finality in her eyes. Wait for me in the next life. I won't lose so easily next time. The blade suddenly pierced through flesh, letting out a dull thud. Dominic froze, his pupils trembling violently from absolute terror. Warm liquid splattered onto his cloak. Verona! He screamed the name with all his might. Dominic bolted upright in bed, gasping for air. Cold sweat soaked his shirt, his hands clutching the messy bedding tightly. He looked around the silent bedroom, his eyes filled with confusion and dread. Is this reality? Verona's dying voice still echoed in his ears. Wait for me in the next life. I won't lose so easily next. Dominic covered his face with his hands, a few low, cold laughs escaping from between his fingers. What an absurd thing to say. Life isn't the kind of thing that you can just start over whenever you want. He slowly lowered his hands, a self-mocking curve on his lips. His eyes, however, stared blankly ahead. What if what Verona saw wasn't the future, but the past that had already happened? Start over? What if she is just repeating the same life,